Hello and welcome to the ADHD Skills Lab. This is our research recap episode with the wonderful Will Kerb from Hacking Your ADHD. In each one of these episodes, we will go through a paper, we'll look at some of the practical takeaways, how it's going to affect you with your ADHD, as well as what we liked and what we didn't like about it. So if you've always wondered where some of this research that helps make some of the decisions about your life is coming from, this is what we unpack, this is what we demystify. So come along for the ride.
This time we're looking at an article from the Journal of Neuroscience and Therapeutics from 2024 called The Interference of Default Mode Network on Attention Networks in Adults with Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder and its Association with Genetic Variants and Treatment Outcomes.
Yeah.
Bit of a word salad, lots to go on there.
They wanted to get all the keywords in.
The big takeaway from this is we're talking about the default mode network today.
Yeah.
So let's hear a little bit about this paper.
Yeah. So basically, this paper was really interesting. They did. I'm just going to read it. Voxel-based whole brain connectome analysis. So some pretty cool genetic and also brain analysis with 84 adults with ADHD and 89 healthy controls. I love to say that, but 89 controls to identify what's going on in the brain, specifically looking at the default network. And I know because you've talked about the default network before, do you want to give us a little definition of what this is?
Yeah, and before that, also just come in to let people know that the connectome is the new way that they're mapping the brain.
It's very pretty.
When we think about all the lobes and stuff, that is like thinking about the brain in terms of like continents, whereas with this, it's looking at like cities, and from what I've read, they're like, it's not even close to being really mapped that way. No. They're like, we want to go down to neighborhoods.
It looks like a beautiful like node network, just lots of different colors going everywhere.
Yeah. All right. But back to what you're saying, the default mode network. This is also an idea that I have been wanting to look more at, because the default mode network is these connected regions of our brain that become active when the brain is at rest and we're not focused on doing an activity. So things that we do are like daydreaming or self-reflection, thinking about memories, that kind of thing. And it's then typically deactivated when we engage in the task positive network, where we're like doing stuff. Makes sense. And the reason I want to look at, from what my understanding of the default mode network, is we're not always seeing it turn off when in ADHD when we go into the task positive network. So we have these regions of the brain responsible for daydreaming while we're doing stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And also weirdly, I was listening to Hallowell talk about this, responsible for some of the more negative stuff as well, like ruminating, catastrophizing. So it can have those effects as well.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we can think about as the default mode network is, this idea of this is when our brain is not doing stuff. That's what's kind of going on. And by not doing stuff, I mean physically active stuff. If we're just thinking, that's kind of that we can still be in that active.
Yeah, 100%. So what they looked at with this, and they mentioned it in the introduction, they looked at whether CBT had an effect on it. It's interesting they chose CBT. There's so many different types of therapeutics, and sometimes people don't like CBT, some people love CBT, but for whatever reason they chose it. It's quite common to be used in research.
And just to mention real quick, just for people that don't know, that's a cognitive behavioral therapy. Yeah, and it is mostly evidence-based, but we see less of that for ADHD than for a lot of other conditions, although it is considered an evidence-based approach to treating ADHD.
Exactly, which is one of the reasons that it comes up in the research. And what they wanted to do here, I thought it was really interesting. They talked about the gene-brain behavior framework. So basically genetic variants. They talked about monoamine oxidase A, monoamine oxidase B, places, things like that, might influence the brain's development, and then the brain's structural and or functional alterations would lead to the cognitive dysfunction, and then this would bring along the clinical manifestations. So they're sort of going even deeper than just the brain and how it's working, and they're going, okay, we think there's genetic components that are affecting the brain, affecting this default mode network, that are then leading to ADHD symptoms.
Which is a great thing to think about. What is this underlying factor
Yeah.
that's causing ADHD rather than just being, hey, you have symptoms.
Yeah, look, we can see it in your brain. I mean, for a lot of people, that's mind-blowing in itself. But yeah, they wanted to talk even deeper than that.
Yeah. And it is also important for us to think about this in terms of how ADHD symptoms are not always associated with ADHD. They can come from a lot of other things. We see this with like trauma.
Yeah, sleep
where
deprivation.
you have a lot of very similar symptoms, but very different causes.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. And I guess by looking at the genetic component, you can potentially separate whether it's just sleep deprivation or whether it's ADHD.
Yeah. And which is then important for treatment. 'Cause,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I guess probably have some similar results treating sleep deprivation with stimulants as you would with, but the end result of trying to, you can treat sleep deprivation much better with
Sleep. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, so in this study, one of the very interesting things about this study was, again, looking at adults, which is very cool. They also said that all the adults with ADHD had a childhood diagnosis and they were all unmedicated and had never received any psychotropic drugs for ADHD, which was wild. I don't think I've ever seen a study that says this. So for anybody who's wondering about that, anybody who's deep in the research and going, but did they have medication at some point? No, they didn't.
Which might be, as we talked about before we started recording, this is a study from China, and so they do have a bit of a different cultural norm there, so I can see that being more likely in a place
Yes.
where it's maybe not a medication first for
Exactly.
treating ADHD.
Exactly, yeah. And what they found was for the 14 subjects who participated in the CBT, their ADHD total scores did significantly decrease after treatment. So there was a significant decrease using CBT, essentially. And they also found that these changes were related to what they call the functional cognitive connectivity strength between the left middle temporal gyrus and the right middle central gyrus. So there was like, they noticed that when they did CBT, there was a connectivity in the brain that was increasing using this very cool method that was also contributing to ADHD total scores decreasing, which was interesting. So there's a couple of pieces going on here showing that the CBT is having an effect on your brain, which from just a brain plasticity perspective is pretty cool.
Yeah, because we do want to know, ideally, when we're doing some sort of treatment, we don't want to have to do it forever.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the case, and that's like, I'm wearing glasses, I'm never going to not wear glasses
Yeah.
just by wearing glasses.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But if I'm probably never going to get completely off of ADHD medication just by everything I do. But when I'm doing like therapies and stuff, I do want to see some kind of lasting result.
Yeah, 100%. And that was very interesting. They didn't get to test it across time, but I think it's nice as well because sometimes these things can feel very nebulous. You're sort of going, okay, I'm doing CBT, which means I feel better, which means my ADHD is better. But is that really doing anything? Is it just in my head? I mean, I hear this all the time. Actually, ironically, sometimes I go on podcasts like this and talk about things. And people do ask me, they're like, is ADHD real? I still get that question. Because there's an underlying, I think, lack of knowledge about it. And so when you look at this kind of research, it really helps to consolidate that, yes, it is.
Yeah, well, and I know for some people when they say they take their medication, they're like, oh, it's like putting on glasses and I can totally tell when I'm on. I am not like that at all. When I take my medication, I'm like, I feel normal, I feel great. And then I'll be like doing something in a day and I'm like, today is awful. I can't do anything.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I didn't take my medication today. I feel like it feels like I have my glasses on and took them off instead.
Yeah.
And I can't figure out why everything's blurry.
Which I can imagine happening even with glasses. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I do that. I don't have a very strong prescription, but I have to squint to read them. And I'm like, why am I squinting at everything?
Yeah.
Oh, it's because I just got out of the shower and haven't put them back on.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting as this idea. And yeah, so basically what they said is the results of our whole brain EMDMR analysis provides evidence of the default mode network's interference as an inherent feature in the development of ADHD. So their argument is the default mode network is being interfered with. We can see that in the brain, and it is contributing to ADHD. And if you do CBT, then it can help to reduce that interference. At least in the short term, they didn't test it in the long term.
Yeah. And it's something that we can measurably see. It's not just, oh, I'm better at organizing my calendar.
Yeah, exactly. It's like your brain is shifting and changing, which is one of the reasons I love neuroscience, honestly, is because you get to see that.
Yeah, and I do think this is an interesting thing to think about, too, with the idea, this isn't something the study says, I'm just postulating on, is if that can have downstream effects of, oh, I have better executive function as a child, and maybe my developmental phases are going better because of that fact.
Yeah, no, definitely. Definitely, that is interesting, and I think that there's a lot of parents right now who are going, oh.
Yeah, I mean, I have read studies that show that medication has that effect, and it's where if you are treating your ADHD as a child, you have less symptoms as an adult, which is fantastic. But is, again, early studies are like, yeah, this is what we're seeing, but we're not completely positive. Maybe there's some other effects going on here. We don't have direct correlation, but we are seeing that, yeah. And I think that's one of the, big differences I see, too, when I'm talking to people who are listening to the show. So I have a lot more late diagnosed people, and they're like, how could things have been different? And I'm like, this is one of the ways.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just so many differences. And I also think just understanding, to come back to it, the CBT, this idea of what it would be like to have a sense of emotional regulation. I mean, I don't know how many people my age got, I didn't know about CBT until I started studying it in university. That was kind of my first introduction to a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, because it's a really interesting thing to be like, oh, I'm just going to be questioning my own thoughts. Like, is what I'm saying in my head true? Can I, because a lot of times with ADHD, we have this black and white thinking where it's like, oh, I can never find my key. Like, I can never get out the door on time. And this well, is that true? Are there things I can do about that? And it's like, oh, that is true. I can do things about that. But it does feel like in my head when I say I can never be somewhere on time. That feels true too, but it's important to be able to question that. Which
is, again, that default mode network, that demon idea that Hallowell talks about, where he's like, we tend to have this background network that won't turn off. It's kind of hanging out in the background being like, oh, and this, and have you thought about this? Because we're dopamine seeking, and sometimes the negative stuff, unfortunately, is dopamine.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
Yeah, well, that's why they're doing CBT.
Yeah, so I think just some final thoughts on this study is, I mean, they did talk about that this is just preliminary research, and they want to do a lot more into this, seeing how there can be other factors that go into this. It's very interesting that they have, no one had ever taken ADHD medication. Would that have
made a difference?
Now that we know that, maybe we could see if there's a difference there.
Yeah.
Or they talk about finding out if there's any particular influences based on sex, and seeing what that might have an effect on how these brain regions work.
Yeah, 100%.
Which I think is especially with this recent groundswell of women being diagnosed. Maybe that is one of the factors. Maybe this is something where we see these symptoms later in life with women more than early in life, and that is why there's more people being like, oh yeah, this is... Although a lot of times it's like, oh yeah, we saw this as a child, we just ignored it because they weren't causing trouble.
Yeah, they weren't causing trouble for the teacher. Yeah, it is an interesting one, and I think it kind of comes back to something we talked about in a previous or maybe future episode, depending on where this goes, which is this idea of suppression and masking, and the general idea that people, I would say women historically, but I think it could be everybody, who are better at or more likely to mask and suppress their symptoms are unfortunately less likely to get support and more likely to be using maladaptive coping strategies for the default mode network.
Yeah, we also see this default mode network playing a very strong role in the ways we do see inattentive ADHD manifesting with being spacing out and not listening entirely to a conversation. I know I have this thing where I've had this discussion with my wife. It's like, if you're talking to me while I'm driving, sometimes I'm just not listening. Not on purpose. I'll just be like driving along and then being like, oh my God, she's been talking. How long? I have no idea what the conversation's about. And I'll be like, sorry, I wasn't listening. Just because I want to be like, hey, I wasn't listening, but I do want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, it can happen, and it's really common with ADHD, and I think it's always that idea of like, do you tell the person, like, how well do you know them? Do you come back in and try and pick up context clues? Yeah, it's interesting. I think there is a sense of, I guess, if we were to come back to it, that in this paper with CBT and all that kind of stuff, it's like, if you're struggling, you should get some support. You don't have to just hide it and push through. It's probably not good for you. It's not probably good for your brain. We're actually seeing differences in your brain if you get some support.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hello! So you were just listening to a research recap. I'm Sky Waterson of Unconventional Organization. If you like that, there's lots more information about ADHD and support for you at unconventionalorganization.com. You can go ahead and check that out. Lots of free resources, lots of strategies, and if you want to join our programs, you can do that as well. And we'll see you there, Unconventional Organization.